Of all the sea life stalked by Anomalocaris, Pikaya, a tiny worm-like creature, somehow escaped extinction. This bit of an animal had no protective shell or defensive spines. But in the Cambrian period, one part of its design was wholly unique. As Conway Morris discovered, Pikaya has a structure remarkably similar to a modern-day animal called Amphioxus. Both are equipped with a long, stiff rod running the length of the body, the notochord. The notochord, which supported Pikaya's muscle structure, is the design common to all vertebrates. This modest creature may be our earliest recognizable ancestor.
Pikaya, I believe, evolved into something like a fish, and from the fish, of course, we have the amphibians, represented today by the frogs and the salamanders, for instance, which invaded land in the Devonian. And then after that, we have the reptiles and the mammals. So perhaps if Pikaya had not survived, if it had gone extinct at some time, then of course ultimately there would have been no mammals and of course no humans.
Though much about our lineage remains a mystery, the origins of the human backbone are linked to Pikaya and its notochord. Few developments would lead to greater diversity. The reign of Anomalocaris was not short-lived. It flourished for nearly 20 million years, 100 times longer than the entire history of Homo sapiens. But in the evolutionary lottery, it was the lowly Pikaya that survived, bearing offspring that would eventually populate the seas, the land, and the skies. California's Death Valley, one of the most arid regions in the world. 400 million years ago, an enormous river filled this valley, linking it to the distant sea. It was here that the fossils of the first fish to brave the freshwater habitat were found. It had taken them 60 million years to gain access to these estuaries. The man who discovered the fossil was Dr. David Elliott of Northern Arizona University, a specialist on ancient fish.
The rocks have been slid.
Tons of earth and sand formed sediments at this site, deposited by the river that ran through Death Valley eons ago. And it is here that Dr. Elliott has been focusing his excavation and research work on ancient freshwater pioneers.
Can't really tell what that is. This is a Taraspid, this is a Lingulid. And Lingulids are rather interesting because they're characteristic of estuarine environments, that is, environments in which freshwater and marine waters are mingling. These are areas of very high nutrients where you may have large numbers of organisms coming to feed, and we have many Taraspids here. There are also areas that many marine organisms can't get into. They're not able to survive in brackish conditions, and so it may be that Taraspids were protected from some of their possible predators by living in these environments.
Freshwater habitats have almost no salt content. A change in salinity can spell instant death for unacclimated marine life. This Paramecium thrives in the salty medium of seawater. Breathing saline fluid, it regulates its mineral levels and ejects wastes. Salt-free water is added, changing the balance. In this unfamiliar, hostile freshwater environment, the Paramecium takes in water without voiding it, destroying the cell. The now bloated Paramecium ruptures and dies. Taraspid is about 8 inches long, its head covered with tough bony armor and its body with primitive scales. Unlike Paramecium, Taraspid managed to adjust to this new freshwater habitat with a little creative bioengineering. The Taraspid's protective shell prevented water from penetrating the body through its outer layers, but the gills it used to breathe were a weak spot. To balance its system, Taraspid developed a kidney powerful enough to pump extraneous water from its bloodstream. Transforming its physiology was a major evolutionary breakthrough for the first freshwater fish, but it was only a first step. "400 million years ago, life on the river was unfolding. But the freshwater habitat posed new challenges. Rapid currents and waterfalls to negotiate. It took millions of years for marine life to adapt to these new ecosystems. To survive here, Earth's first fish would experiment with many anatomical designs. Miguasha Park lies on northeastern Canada's Gaspé Peninsula. 400 million years ago, this was a tropical region, situated directly under the equator. Etched in this meandering stretch of cliffs is the 20-million-year history of fish evolution. Fossils of freshwater pioneers, fish with fins to resist river current, carnivorous fish with jaws and teeth,
evenly distributed. There's some layers with more species.
and a peculiar fish entirely different from any of the others. This fish had a backbone. Until now, there were fish with tough exoskeletons, but none with hard bone inside the body. Cheirolepis, the earliest creature with a spine, appeared 390 million years ago. The most common fish today, the bony fishes, are its direct descendants. Like modern fish, Cheirolepis was equipped with one pair each of pelvic and pectoral fins. It was sleek, with jaws and sharp teeth for catching prey. Acquiring a spine, Cheirolepis developed strong muscles to swim with speed and power. But there were other agile swimmers in the river that had managed to do without one. Why then did the backbone develop? While the sea was rich in minerals essential to life, the river was in short supply. This is heart tissue. Working in unison, these cells allow the heart to pump blood throughout the body. To function properly, the heart needs calcium. Calcium concentration in a river is in perpetual flux. When levels are high, calcium is stored as bone. When they're low, the bone reservoir supplies the necessary mineral, regardless of external conditions. Meanwhile, the seemingly solid bone is constantly being replenished. At the top of the screen, hard bone is visible. Moving below are cells that dissolve it. Once the bone is dissolved, calcium circulates through the bloodstream to every part of the body. The fate of ancient fish rests on a simple backbone. Those without eventually perished from calcium deficiency or returned to their native sea. For many years, Cheirolepis reigned as the king of freshwater fish. His anatomy gained him independence from the marine world. Today, the descendants of Cheirolepis thrive in both fresh and saltwater habitats. The river was a proving ground for the earliest fish and their offspring. And in this new habitat, they gradually adapted the body system's key to survival on land. Another fish with a backbone appeared on the river at about the time of Cheirolepis. It was called Euthynopteron, a bottom dweller. Euthynopteron was not an efficient swimmer like many fish, but it had secured an evolutionary niche with powerful bony fins to push its way through the river's undergrowth. This fish was a stealthy hunter poised for action. Eusthenopteron's habitat shaped its unusual bone structure, which would one day lead to the evolution of terrestrial animals. South America's Amazon breeds acres of jungle swampland, mimicking conditions in the age of Eusthenopteron. And with the swamps, a host of unusual life forms. Among them, the lungfish, a mud-dwelling creature. This fish has gills, but it also has lungs for breathing air. In such murky water, oxygen content is often very low. The lungfish probably developed lungs to breathe oxygen from the air when the supply in the water was depleted. Just as his ancestor Eusthenopteron had done eons before. Poking its head above the surface for a life-sustaining breath, Eusthenopteron surely caught a glimpse of the world above the waterline. Now that fish had evolved kidneys, bone, and lungs, land was almost within reach. The first four-legged creature appeared 10 million years after Eusthenopteron. Its remains discovered in a forest in Scotland. At the time, this region resembled today's Amazonian swampland.
Is that bone or is it a pebble?
Dr. Per Erik Ahlberg of the British Natural History Museum has been studying the earliest tetrapods. He's trying to find out how and why limbs evolved from fins. Only 10 fossil pieces have been discovered to date. But even from these few specimens, an image of this new creature is emerging. Almost 5 feet long, it looks like today's giant salamander.
I suspect that the reason why limbs evolved was because these animals were living in very shallow water, and limbs can be rather better than fins for moving in those sort of conditions, even if you're not really moving onto land. These earliest tetrapods with limbs rather than paired fins still have gills, tail fins, and other features which suggest that they were very much aquatic animals. So I don't really believe that they were using the legs for walking purposefully over land. They might have made short excursions over land, but more probably they were using those limbs in shallow water.
Today's giant salamander still spends most of its time in the water. Negotiating the shallows is a matter of walking, not swimming. Even in swift currents, the salamander plants its feet on the river bottom and moves around with ease, aided by its natural buoyancy. To move as fluidly on land, the salamander would require a far sturdier skeletal structure. "360 million years ago, the once barren earth lay under a canopy of green. Giant forests thrived, and small insects now burrowed in the shady wetlands and soil. This landscape was ready to support new life. But to take their first step on land, our ancestors had one more obstacle to overcome: gravity. This is Ichthyostega, an animal that surfaced 10 million years after the earliest four-legged creatures. Judging from the size of his skull, Ichthyostega measured nearly 4 feet long, its backbone and hind legs clearly defined. But this animal also had thick finger bones and a sturdy skeletal structure. Scientists conclude this was the first creature to walk on land. For the first time, an animal with a supporting skeleton around its backbone. The rib cage protected vital organs like the heart and lungs. On land, without the buoyancy of water to cushion them, these organs would be crushed by the animal's weight. By developing ribs, Ichthyostega emerged in a body that could withstand Earth's gravity and move about freely over land. At long last, the time had come to look beyond the water's edge. A 100 million years had passed since the earliest fish ventured from the ocean into fresh water. A habitat that helped shape the complex body systems necessary for life on land. Bolstered by millions of years of evolutionary advancement, Ichthyostega took its first steps while an ocean of life swam in its bones. From sea to river and from river to land, life had taken leaps of astonishing complexity. There is no way to know what called Ichthyostega from the relative comfort of the river toward the challenges that awaited on land. But in taking its first steps, Ichthyostega blazed a new trail, a path we too would forge on our own evolutionary journey from the nurturing seas into the great unknown.